King Charles has just suffered the most humiliating blow of his reign. What began as a whisper has exploded into a national outcry. Britons are furious, demanding an immediate general election, and the chaos has left the monarchy itself trembling. Across the nation, the message is clear. Charles is failing to lead, Parliament is failing to govern, and the people are ready to tear the system apart. The pressure on King Charles is now unbearable. What was once quiet discontent has turned into full-blown rage. Ordinary citizens, from pensioners in the Midlands to young voters in London, are demanding one thing above all else: dissolve Parliament and call new elections. The humiliation for Charles is not only that his people are furious, it is that they no longer believe he has the courage or will to act. And this crisis, once political, has now become personal. The king's authority is being openly mocked, and his silence is only adding fuel to the fire. For weeks, the British people have endured skyrocketing prices, collapsing public services, and a political class more interested in clinging to power than serving their country. Approval ratings for Parliament have fallen to historic lows, barely scraping 18%. The anger is palpable. Families struggling with energy bills, nurses working double shifts without pay rises, young people locked out of housing. They are all turning their fury toward Westminster. And when politicians refuse to listen, the people look higher. They look to the crown. But instead of decisive leadership, they see hesitation. Instead of a protector, they see a monarch paralysed by fear of breaking tradition. Social media has turned this humiliation into a storm Charles cannot escape. Hashtags demanding a general election trend daily, attracting millions of views. TikTok clips mocking the king's inaction spread like wildfire. Twitter threads accuse him of hiding in Buckingham Palace while Britain burns. Even Instagram, a platform usually dominated by lifestyle and celebrity culture, is flooded with posts calling for change. The digital tide has turned against the monarchy, and it shows no signs of stopping. But here's the most shocking part. The legal power for Charles to act still exists. Buried deep in the constitutional framework is the royal prerogative, the authority to dissolve Parliament in times of national crisis. This power has not been used in decades, but technically it remains. Constitutional scholars argue that when Parliament loses legitimacy and the public turns against it, the monarch has both the right and the duty to step in. Millions of Britons are now demanding that Charles use this weapon. The humiliation is that everyone knows he could act, yet he hasn't. The numbers reveal the scale of the crisis. Inflation has eaten away 25% of household purchasing power in just 3 years. Net migration figures remain at record highs. Public trust in MPs sits at the lowest level since modern polling began. Protesters now flood the streets of Manchester, Birmingham, Glasgow and Cardiff. Their chants are deafening. General election now. These are not small demonstrations by fringe activists. They are vast gatherings of workers, families, veterans and students. A united voice of a broken nation demanding immediate action. And yet, inside Westminster, politicians cling desperately to power. Conservative MPs argue that elections would be disastrous for the economy. Labour insists the calls for dissolution are dangerous populism. But in private, both parties are terrified. They know their approval ratings have collapsed. They know that if Charles does act, the people will not forgive them. And so they scramble behind closed doors, trying to survive a tidal wave of fury that grows louder every day. Even international allies are beginning to question Britain's stability. European leaders whisper about the chaos in London, fearing it could spread across the continent. The White House has issued vague statements about respecting democratic traditions, while privately expressing concern about Britain's political paralysis. Investors are spooked. The pound has already dipped in value, markets are jittery, and foreign businesses are beginning to pull back. All of this while Charles remains silent, watching as his people rage and his authority crumbles. The humiliation for the monarchy is brutal. Polls show that 40% of Britons now believe the monarchy has no purpose if it cannot act in times of national emergency. Among younger voters, that number rises to 55%. For centuries, the crown has been a symbol of stability, a safety net above the chaos of politics. But if Charles continues to refuse his people, that safety net could snap, and with it, the monarchy itself. The crisis is no longer about whether Britain should hold elections. It is about whether Britain should even keep a king. Charles is caught in an impossible trap. If he acts, the political establishment will brand him a tyrant. If he does nothing, his people may decide the monarchy is nothing more than a relic. Either choice risks destroying the crown, but doing nothing may be the greatest humiliation of all. The chants grow louder each night. The protests swell with every passing day. The country is not simply restless, it is on the edge of eruption. Charles's hesitation has turned a constitutional question into a national humiliation, and the longer he waits, the more dangerous this crisis becomes. The rage is no longer confined to the streets. It has reached Britain's most powerful institutions. Trade unions, veterans groups, business federations, and even religious leaders are weighing in, and their voices are splitting the nation in half. The humiliation for King Charles deepens as every new statement, every new petition, every new rally highlights his indecision. When Britain's largest trade unions call for change, the government dismisses them as disruptive. But when lifelong monarchists, people who swore loyalty to the crown itself, begin to demand elections, it becomes impossible to ignore. Former generals, retired judges, and even bishops now openly question whether the king can remain neutral while his country spirals into political collapse. Charles has become the target of scorn from both sides, accused of cowardice by the people and feared as a potential dictator by politicians. It is the worst of both worlds. Behind closed doors, Buckingham Palace is in turmoil. Courtiers loyal to tradition urge caution, warning that one wrong move could shatter the monarchy forever. But younger advisors insist neutrality is no longer an option. They argue that neutrality in a crisis is itself a political choice, one that risks leaving the crown powerless and irrelevant. Palace insiders whisper of shouting matches, late-night consultations with constitutional lawyers, and frantic attempts to measure public opinion. Yet none of this stops the bleeding. Every day Charles remains silent, his authority drains away. The crown, once untouchable, is now seen as fragile, perhaps even irrelevant. Meanwhile, Westminster has descended into chaos. Cabinet ministers bicker openly on television, contradicting one another as they try to defend the government's crumbling legitimacy. Backbench rebellions are spreading, with MPs whispering about secret plots to oust their own leaders before the king is forced to act. Leaked memos reveal panic among party strategists, who admit that early elections could wipe out their parliamentary majorities entirely. In their desperation, politicians have begun lashing out at Charles himself, accusing him of meddling even though he has not lifted a finger. The irony is clear. The more the king hesitates, the more he is accused of interfering anyway. The economic fallout is growing darker by the day. Investors have pulled billions from British assets, fearing political instability. The pound has fallen further, government bond yields are spiking, and small businesses across the country are bracing for disaster. Economists warn that continued paralysis could plunge Britain into a recession deeper than anything seen since the financial crash of 2008. Yet supporters of dissolution argue the opposite, that only a general election, forced by the crown if necessary, can break the deadlock and restore stability. It is a gamble with Britain's future on the line, and every hour of hesitation makes the stakes higher. On social media, the narrative has already been written. TikTok influencers and YouTube commentators have become the new voice of the nation, reaching millions of disillusioned citizens who no longer trust mainstream media. Videos mocking Parliament and ridiculing Charles for his silence are going viral at astonishing speed. Independent creators are outperforming the BBC, ITV, and Sky combined. Their message is blunt: Britain is broken, and if the king cannot fix it, then the monarchy has no purpose. For a generation raised on digital platforms, this humiliation is personal. They see a monarch who refuses to defend them, and their anger is sharper than anything Charles has faced in public life. The geographic divide makes the crisis even more explosive. In London and the South East, where ties to the political elite run deepest, support for dissolution is weak. But across the North, the Midlands and Wales, the fury is overwhelming. In cities like Sunderland, Stoke and Blackpool, support for forcing elections through royal action exceeds 70%. The voices of these towns, long ignored by Westminster, are now amplified by social media and echoed in nationwide protests. This is not a quiet revolution. It is a roar from the forgotten heart of Britain, and Charles cannot silence it. International reactions are amplifying the humiliation. European leaders describe Britain as a democracy in meltdown. Commonwealth officials warn of copycat movements in Canada and Australia if Charles dares to act, or if he fails to act decisively. The White House is quietly panicking, fearing that Britain's instability could undermine NATO unity. Financial markets treat every whisper from Buckingham Palace as a signal, causing violent swings in global trading. In short, the king's hesitation is not just a domestic problem, it has become a global spectacle. The monarch, once seen as a ceremonial figurehead, is now the pivot on which Britain's entire stability rests. The countdown has begun, and Britain is holding its breath. Every hour that passes without a decision from King Charles only magnifies the tension. deepens the humiliation and fuels the rage. Sources close to Buckingham Palace whisper that the king is consulting with constitutional experts from across the Commonwealth, desperate for a way out of the trap. Former Australian and Canadian officials have flown in quietly to advise him, and legal scholars are locked in marathon sessions, debating whether the royal prerogative still holds force in this modern era. The legal grey zone is vast and dangerous. On one side, defenders argue that if Parliament loses the confidence of both the people and the Crown, the monarch has the right, even the duty, to dissolve it. On the other side, critics warn that any such move would trigger the most severe constitutional crisis since the English Civil War. For Charles, there is no easy answer. Whichever path he chooses will scar his reign forever. The streets, meanwhile, show no patience for royal hesitation. Each day the protests grow larger, spreading from city centres into small towns, villages and suburbs. The chants are no longer just about Parliament. Increasingly, they are about the monarchy itself. What good is a king who does nothing? Protesters ask, their voices echoing through streets once filled with royal celebration. This transformation, from anger at Parliament to anger at the Crown, is the deepest humiliation of all. For centuries, the monarchy has survived by staying above politics, by being a symbol of unity. Now, that very neutrality is seen as betrayal. Neutrality is no longer safety, it is weakness. Even Britain's most loyal institutions are wavering. Military veterans, once the backbone of royal support, are now divided. Thousands have signed petitions urging Charles to act, insisting their oath was sworn to the Crown, not to politicians. Trade unions are split down the middle, with some leaders declaring that Parliament has abandoned working families. Even the Church is sending warnings cloaked in careful language. Religious leaders speak of extraordinary times requiring extraordinary measures. The monarchy is being pulled into the storm whether it wants to be or not, and Charles can no longer hide behind tradition. The markets reflect this chaos with brutal clarity. The pound continues to slide, British stocks tumble, and investors flee in search of stability elsewhere. Some analysts argue that a decisive royal intervention could restore confidence by clearing the political deadlock. Others warn it would be the final straw, collapsing Britain's credibility on the world stage. Every fluctuation in the market feels like a referendum on Charles himself. Never before has the personal hesitation of one man carried such global consequences. And that, more than anything, reveals the scale of Britain's humiliation. A constitutional monarchy that once prided itself on stability has become the epicentre of instability. Across the world, leaders are watching with fascination and fear. In Brussels, EU officials warn that Britain is playing with fire. In Washington, American strategists privately worry that Britain could lose its role as the steady hand of Europe. In Canada and Australia, debates about abolishing the monarchy altogether are heating up, fueled by Britain's turmoil. The ripple effects are real, and they are spreading fast. What Charles decides in the coming days will not just shape his own reign, it could reshape constitutional monarchies everywhere. But the most dangerous element of this crisis is time. The longer Charles waits, the smaller his window becomes. If he acts now, he may be seen as decisive. If he waits too long, he will look reactive, weak, and humiliated beyond repair. Public anger is reaching boiling point, and once it spills over, it may no longer be controlled. Political insiders warn that early elections may become inevitable anyway. If Parliament collapses on its own, Charles risks being seen not as a leader, but as a spectator to history, a king who watched his nation crumble while clutching the safety of silence. This is the ultimate gamble. Act and risk destroying the Crown's neutrality. Refuse and risk destroying the Crown itself. Either way, history will not forgive hesitation. Already, polls show nearly 40% of Britons ready to consider abolishing the monarchy if Charles refuses to step in. Among younger voters, that number climbs past 50%. This is not idle speculation. It is the future of the monarchy hanging by a thread. Charles is facing a moment no British monarch has confronted in nearly 2 centuries, the choice between revolution and irrelevance. This is the ultimate gamble. Act and risk destroying the Crown's neutrality. Refuse and risk destroying the Crown itself. Either way, history will not forgive hesitation. Already, polls show nearly 40% of Britons ready to consider abolishing the monarchy if Charles refuses to step in. Among younger voters, that number climbs past 50%. This is not idle speculation. It is the future of the monarchy hanging by a thread. Charles is facing a moment no British monarch has confronted in nearly 2 centuries, the choice between revolution and irrelevance. And so the stage is set. Britain is in chaos, Parliament has lost the people, and the monarchy itself is on trial. The next words from King Charles will decide everything. Whether Britain descends into political anarchy or emerges into a new era of leadership, will he act boldly and risk it all, or cling to tradition and watch his reign collapse under the weight of humiliation? The entire nation is waiting, the world is watching, and the answer, when it comes, will define not only the future of Charles's monarchy, but the very soul of British democracy.